Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the second installment of our Reliability 101 and 201 webinar series. Today, we'll be discussing registration and certification with Aaron Quigley, our Manager of Registration and Certification and two-time Best Salsa Champion at Texas RE. Before we get started, we've got just a few things to go over. First, as always, is our antitrust admonition. And as usual, I will spare you listening to me read it and just say that if you have any questions about the antitrust admonition, that you can contact Texas RE's General Counsel. This is the second installment of our Reliability 101 series, and here is a full list of all the sessions of 101s and 201s. Just a note that on the 25th, we have added a second session. It'll be a double header. And on the 19th, we are actually closed for Juneteenth. So that is why that week is a little underrepresented compared to the rest. The RO has a number of other activities going on simultaneously. May through July, NERC is holding their GADS wind and solar template and application training. Tomorrow, MRO is holding their very own version of this activity, their NERC certification and certification review process webinar. And then on June 10th, there is a technical talk with RF where they will talk about SIP lessons learned as well as the summer outlook. So if you are up in the Michigan-ish area, be sure to catch that. A lot of great information for folks in that region. As I mentioned to those of you who got here early, we will be using Slido for questions and answers. To get to Slido, go to sli.do or slido.com and enter today's participant code, which is TXRE. Or you can scan the QR code on the right hand of your screen. And folks, I forgot to mention when we were on the upcoming sessions slide that we're holding a lot of these. We appreciate you for taking the time out of your schedule each day to show up to these. If you would like a letter of certification that you attended, if you've got any training requirements where you're working, you can go ahead and let us know at information@texasre.org, and we will send you back a certification that you participated today. But without further ado, I will turn it over to our presenter of the day, Ms. Aaron Quigley. Aaron, take it away.
Thank you, Thad. Good afternoon, everyone. Like Thad said, my name is Aaron Quigley, and I am the Manager of Registration and Certification at Texas RE. Hopefully, my 101 presentation skills will hold up to my salsa contest entries. So let's go ahead and get started. This is just a high-level agenda of the information that we're going to be covering this afternoon. I'm going to talk a little bit about the registration process and who needs to be registered with Texas RE and with NERC. Then we'll go into information about the Centralized Organization Registration ERO System, or CORS. This is the computer system that all the entities use to enter information and for us to process applications. Then we'll talk a little bit about the certification and certification review processes. And then I'll give some information and some resources for additional reading. Next slide, please. So let's define registration. Registration is the process through which we identify and register bulk power system, or BPS, owners, operators, and users. These owners, operators, and users are responsible for performing specific functions on the BPS. And once an entity is registered, they become accountable for compliance with the NERC reliability standards. As a reminder, registered entities can face penalties or sanctions for non-compliance with these standards. Next slide, please. So who is actually required to register? There's going to be a lot of information on these slides with references to the different appendices in the rules of procedure where you can find the information. So I recommend referencing those for additional information. The BES, or bulk electric system definition, which is also sometimes referred to as the bright line, is transmission elements that are operated at 100 kV or higher and real power and reactive power resources that are connected at 100 kV or higher. The BES definition establishes element inclusion and exclusion. The registry criteria applies the BES definition to owners and operators. And the registry criteria also includes distribution providers who serve load above 75 megawatts at a single point of interconnection. So let's talk about the inclusion criteria. Next slide. So this is from Appendix 2, the definitions used in the rules of procedure. Inclusion 1 is transmission resources, and these are transformers with the primary terminal and at least one secondary terminal operated at greater than or equal to 100 kV. Inclusion 2 is generating resources. These are those with the generating terminal at the high side of the step-up transformer at greater than or equal to 100 kV, with either a gross individual nameplate of greater than 20 MVA or a gross plant or facility aggregate nameplate of greater than 75 MVA. Inclusion 3 are black start resources, and these are resources that are identified in the transmission operator's restoration plan. Next slide, please. Inclusion 4 is dispersing power producing resources or small scale generation. These are individual resources and the systems designed primarily for delivering capacity from the point where those resources aggregate to greater than 75 MVA of the gross nameplate rating at 100 kV or above. You might have heard about some potential changes related to inverter-based resources. So I don't have enough time in this presentation to go through all of that information, but I would recommend staying up to date with those changes following our communications outreach in NERCs as well. Inclusion 5 is static or dynamic devices excluding generators. And these are those that are dedicated to supplying or absorbing reactive power connected at 100 kV or higher, or through a dedicated transformer with a high side voltage of 100 kV or higher, or through a transformer that is designated in inclusion I1. Next slide, please. So if you'd like to take a look at some example diagrams of BES inclusions and exclusions, there's some resources linked here. And just as a reminder for everyone, all the links are clickable links. So if you download these slides after the presentation, you'll be able to access any of the resources that I talk about in the presentation. Additionally, at the end of this slide deck, there's some information about the sections of the rules of procedure that I'm referencing. If you would like to have information about exceptions to the inclusions and exclusions, there are some processes that exist for submitting and being considered for exceptions. So take a look at Appendix 5A, 5B, and 5C of the rules of procedure. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have our first Slido question, which is going to be a true or false question. So true or false, all black start resources identified in a TOP's restoration plan are required to be NERC registered according to the NERC rules of procedure. So I'll give everyone a few seconds to join in and submit their answer for that question. All right, we still have some more submissions coming in, but it seems like almost everyone is everyone is reaching a consensus about the question. And I think we could probably go ahead and move on, and we can say that this answer is true. So good job, everyone. Just as a reminder, regardless of the size of the resource and whether it meets like the other thresholds and the other inclusions, if it is identified as a black start resource in a TOP restoration plan, that is a resource that is required to be NERC registered according to the rules of procedure. Next slide, please. So let's just quickly go over the registered function types that we have in the Texas RE region. I'm not going to read all the definitions, but just as a reminder, these are available on these slides and then also in the rules of procedure Appendix 5B. The function types that are noted with an asterisk and bolded are those that must be NERC certified before they can register for the function. And we'll talk a little bit more about certification later in the presentation. So we have balancing authority or BA, distribution provider or DP, distribution provider UFLS, which stands for under frequency load shedding, or DPUFLS, generator operator or GOP, generator owner or GO, planning authority PA, or planning coordinator PC, which are interchangeable terms. Next slide, please. Reliability coordinator or RC, resource planner or RP, transmission owner or TO, transmission operator or TOP, transmission planner or TP, and transmission service provider or TSP. So you'll notice that the BA, RC, and TOP functions are the ones that must be NERC certified before they can register for that function. Next slide, please. So something to point out that is actually unique to Texas is that we only have one entity that serves as our RC, BA, PA, TSP, and RP. And that is the Electric Reliability Council of Texas. So those functions are only served by ERCOT in Texas. And then all other registered entities are registered for the other functions that you see in orange on the slide. So that's just something interesting to point out. Next slide, please. All right, let's talk a little bit about entity mapping. Entity mapping is the process of determining whether a regional entity's footprint is being properly served by its registered entities. So this is required because for all of the areas of the BPS, we must ensure through the registration process that no areas are lacking any entities to perform the duties and tasks identified in and required by the reliability standards to the fullest extent practical, and that there is no unnecessary duplication of such coverage or required oversight of such coverage. So just to restate, we make sure that there's no areas that are lacking any entities and that there's no unnecessary duplication of the coverage of those areas. Next slide, please. So this process in particular ensures that all areas are under the oversight of one and only one RC, that all BA and TOP entities are under the responsibility of one and only one RC, that all transmission facilities of the BPS are the responsibility and under the control of one and only one TP, PA, and TOP, and that all loads and generators are under the responsibility and control of one and only one BA. Next slide, please. So this chart here shows the entity mapping that we ask for from each entity, depending on the registration type that we would see. You would enter this information into CORS, which I'll talk more about later in the presentation. But as an example, if you're a generator owner, we would need to have information about the BA, GOP, PC, RC, TO, TOP, and TP that your entity is mapped to. Something else to note is that even if you are registered for multiple functions under the same NCR, let's say, for example, you are registered as a TO and a TOP and also a GO and GOP, we still need you to provide the mapping from the GO to those functions. And the only exception to that is if you have a GO and GOP under the same NCR, we don't need that mapping to be completed, but we still need the other mapping, even if it's one entity that's registered for those functions. Next slide, please. So the most common type of registration is a single entity registration, which is probably what most people are familiar with. But there's also two additional types of registration that I'd like to go over, which are the Joint Registration Organization process, or JRO, and the Coordinated Functional Registration, or CFR. And next slide, please. So JRO is a voluntary written agreement, and it occurs when an entity is registered for a specific function and accepts all compliance responsibility of all applicable NERC reliability standards for itself and on behalf of one or more of its parties or related entities. Whenever a JRO has been written and agreed upon, we will review and approve those JROs in the CORS system. NERC will then, once we approve it, NERC will send their approval letter once they've reviewed it. And then a JRO must be updated when any modifications occur. So the example that we have here is for the distribution provider function. So let's say we have a big co-op company and they register as a distribution provider. They sign a JRO agreement with a small co-op company, and they take all the compliance responsibility for itself and for the unregistered party, which is a small co-op company. And this way, with the JRO agreement, they've eliminated the need for the small co-op company to be registered as a distribution provider. A list of the current JRO entities is posted on the NERC's website if you'd like to review that information. So let's contrast that with the CFR process on the next slide. So CFR, or Coordinated Functional Registration, again, is a voluntary written agreement, but it occurs when two or more NERC registered entities share and divide responsibilities of the NERC reliability standards. So it's a similar process. Once the CFR is submitted in CORS, Texas RE reviews and approves it, and we ensure that there are no gaps or overlaps in responsibility between the parties. After we've approved it, it will get sent to NERC, and they would send an approval letter when they've reviewed it. And then a CFR must be updated when any modifications occur. So this is typically, we might see changes to a standard version or changes to applicable parties, and then that's when the CFR would need to be updated. So as an example here for the generator operator function, let's say that we have an entity called Best Electric, which is registered, and they own and operate a NERC registered facility. And there's a second registered entity called Expert Energy that also operates the same NERC registered facility. They establish a CFR to identify who is responsible for compliance with each of the applicable SIP and ONP standard requirement. And just like the JROs, these current CFR agreements are posted on NERC's website if you'd like to review the current ones. Next slide, please. All right, so let's talk about CORS. Like I mentioned, CORS is the Centralized Organization Registration ERO system. This was launched on July 15th, 2019, and the purpose of this was to provide consistency and alignment across the ERO for how we handle registration changes and registration activities. So it's through this platform that entities are able to manage their registration information, change their contact information, and update functional relationships all from one application. It's accessed through the ERO portal, and the link is posted here. The two main changes, main types of changes that we see in CORS would be submitting a new registration request for a new registered entity and making changes to an existing registration. There are also plenty of training videos that are available, so I recommend checking those out if you're not super familiar with the CORS system. Next slide. All right, so we're ready for our second Slido question. And this question is, through what platform are new registration requests submitted? Hopefully this is fresh on everyone's mind. So it's either A, Align, B, CORS, C, Raptor, or D, registration@texasre.org. All right, I think we're kind of tapering off. Yes, to everyone who put CORS, that is the correct answer. I think sometimes people can kind of get confused with Align because Align is used for compliance and enforcement and other types of changes throughout the ERO, but the registration system is called CORS. Next slide, please. All right, so let's talk about how to access CORS. To access CORS, you'll need to sign up for an ERO portal account with the link that was on one of the previous slides and complete the multi-factor authentication. Once you have an ERO portal account, any individual with an active account is able to submit a new registration application within CORS. And then any user that is an entity admin for a specific entity, they are able to grant access rights to the entities that they are responsible for. So if you need to become the entity admin, you'll have to work with the NERC help desk if no one is currently set up for your entity to be able to have those permissions. And you can see that on this screenshot, the entity registration requests are where you would submit a new registration. And then My Entity CORS is where you would access your information about a current entity that you were logged in under. Next slide, please. So this is just some information about how to navigate in CORS and what the navigation bar information looks like. On the left-hand side of the slide, you can see the new entity registration navigation bar. And then in the middle, you can see the My Entity navigation bar. The main differences with these two different navigation bars are that you wouldn't have the ability to have any information about CFR, JRO, or coordinated oversight if you're submitting a new entity registration, because those would need to be an existing registration before you can submit those. There's some information on the right-hand side of the slide about what the different symbols mean on the navigation bar. So if it's a gray circle, that means that it's a step that you haven't started yet. If it is a green and gray split circle, that means that it's in progress but not completed. And then if it's a green check mark, that means you've completed it. Next slide, please. So what we ask for in Texas RE is that you submit an application within CORS at least 1 month prior to an expected registration date. For GOs, I've listed some of the documentation that we might need, like RARF information, any one-line diagrams, interconnect agreements, and a GO and GOP asset verification form. Once we approve, NERC will send a notice of listing on the NERC compliance registry. And then we'll also, if needed, send a welcome packet with some of the reporting requirements. There's some documentation that we have on our website about how to submit a new registration request in CORS, and that is linked here. Next slide. So you might also be wondering what the effective registration date refers to. This is defined under inclusions I2, I3, and I4. Currently, the way that it's set up is that the registration is effective upon the commercial operations date, and this is when all initial testing and commissioning has been completed. There is a little bit of talk about changing this date, but this is what we have currently as of this presentation. It's also important to note that if you have a project that is initiated in stages or phases, the registration occurs when the resource achieves COD for an aggregate amount of generation that is greater than the applicable threshold in the BES definition. So even if the project isn't completed yet, when the resource achieves COD for an amount that's greater than the threshold, you would need to register. And just as a reminder, once you register, you're responsible for 100% compliance with all of the applicable reliability standards. Next slide. Please report registration changes to us at least 30 days prior to the effective date of any of the changes that are listed here. I have my phone number on the slide, or you can email registration@texasre.org, which is our general registration inbox. So for changes like adding or removing a function, deactivation or deregistration of an existing registration, transferring a function from one entity to another, any sort of asset transfer, merger, or sale, entity name changes, any consolidation of NCR numbers, and any changes in JRO and CFR agreements. Even if you have a change that's not listed here, but you'd like to discuss it, please reach out to me and see if there's anything that we need on our side or any documentation that we need you to submit in CORS. Next slide, please. So this is a flow chart just to go over the process that we follow for any new registration requests and any change requests to an existing registration. So first, typically we would host a meeting with you to kind of get information about the change, find out what exactly the changes are that you're looking for. Then once you actually submit the new registration request or the change request in CORS, if needed, we'll review the request. We'll ask you if we need any additional information. If we approve the request, we'll send that to NERC and they'll complete a review. And then if applicable, NERC will approve the application or the change request. Your status will change in the system. And then if it's a change type that will receive a registration letter, the NERC will send that letter to the PCC. Next slide, please. So it's also very important to note that you should be keeping your contact roles and permission rights up to date in CORS, especially if you have any of the type of changes that we have listed on this slide, like compliance management or entity ownership changes, role and responsibility changes within the organization, or if you have a user or a contact that leaves the company. NERC needs to be able to contact the users that are associated with the company, and you won't be able to make any changes if you don't have any entity admins that are currently listed. So it's a good idea to be periodically going through that information and making sure that it's up to date. If you need assistance changing the permissions or the contacts in the ERO portal, we also have some training available on that, which is linked on this slide. And then if you have any issues that can't be solved with those training manuals or with working with us, you can also open a help desk ticket with NERC. Next slide, please. All right, we'll briefly talk about the certification process. Again, this is only applicable to the RC, BA, and TOP functions. The certification process ensures that these functions can demonstrate that they have the tools, processes, procedures, training, and personnel to perform the functions for which they intend to be registered. This process must be completed within 9 months of when it begins, unless NERC approves an alternate timeline. And then once the certification is complete, the entity is required to start operation of its area within 12 months of that date. So on the right-hand side of this slide, you can see a very high-level flow chart of what it looks like for the certification process. It's relatively similar to an on-site audit if you've been through that, but you would submit an application to Texas RE for the certification. We would assign a certification team, send a certification package to the entity about 90 days prior to the on-site. The entity would respond to the questionnaire in the package, at least 4 weeks prior to the onsite. We review the documentation, ask any additional questions, perform the onsite visit at a mutually agreed upon date, prepare a certification draft report and then a final report, submit a letter of recommendation to NERC, and then at the end of that process, you would receive an official notification and certificate from NERC that the certification process is complete and you've been certified. And after that is complete, then you can go through the registration process. Next slide, please. So certification review, this is something that is conducted when you have an already operating and certified RC, BA, or TOP, and they make changes to their system. The items that are to be considered for a certification review include one or more of the following list of changes, but this is not an exhaustive list. So if you have a change that you're aware of and you're a certified entity, please reach out to us by submitting the certification, notification, and preliminary questionnaire so we can find out more about the type of change that you're wanting to do on your system. But some of the examples that we have listed here would be changes to the registered entity's footprint, relocation of a control center, or a modification of an EMS, which is expected to materially affect the SIP security perimeters or the system operator's situational awareness tools, functionality, or machine interfaces. But again, if it's not one of those items, but you're still expecting to make a change, please reach out to us so we can discuss the nature of the change. Next slide, please. All right, so here we have a Slido question. Which of the following events would trigger a certification review for a BA, RC, or TOP? A, changes to a registered entity's footprint. B, relocation of the control center. C, modification of the EMS. Or D, all of the above. Okay, so I think we have almost everyone entered, and everyone that put D, which I think was everyone, you are correct. So for all of the above types of changes, which again was on an exhaustive list, please contact us about any of these types of changes so we can discuss the impacts for an already operating and certified BA, RC, or TOP. Next slide, please. Now we'll go over a few of the resources that are available. These two that are on this slide, which are also linked once you download the slide deck. These are ERO registration documents. The one on the left, the ERO Enterprise 101 informational package. This is created to provide guidance on becoming a NERC registered entity. So this is a lot of steps to complete if you are a newly registered entity. The ERO registration procedure on the right. This originally was a variety of previously issued materials that they combined into a single document. So this is being updated, but this is the overall registration procedure that we follow. So if you're interested in like a specific type of registration change and want to see the way that it would work or what you need to do, that information is in that document. And these are both published on NERC's registration webpage. Next slide, please. Here we have information about the Texas RE, some of the resources that we have published. The welcome packet is kind of like a checklist. It has a lot of recommended action items for newly registered entities. The new generator welcome package, which is linked on the right, this has a lot of very useful information about setting up internal controls and why those are important. It has information about how to be compliant as a GO and GOP, and when you need to be meeting certain compliance deadlines. And then it also has some example self-certification questions, which are very helpful for whenever you're going to go into some of your first engagements and you're trying to see what the most common types of questions that you would be asked might be. So I recommend checking these resources out as well. Next slide, please. And here's some additional registration and certification resources. So the first link here is our registration website where we have a lot of documentation and then also information about our processes. I think there's a tab for registration and certification. So we have a bunch of resources on there. Additionally, on NERC's registration website, they have their process and guidance documents on there. They also have all of the entities that are on the NERC compliance registry. That is public information that's published on NERC's website. And then, like I mentioned, they also have the CFR and JRO member listings on there as well. And then on the certification website, they do publish final certification reports. And then you can also take a look at the NERC certification process documents for additional information about the certification process. Next slide. All right, this is going to be our final slide. This is my contact information. I also have the email, the registration at texasre.org. So feel free to email either one of those. My phone number is also listed here. So for any types of registration changes, or if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I would love to hear from you. And I think with that, we'll go to the questions. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much, Erin. We do have a couple of questions so far. And folks, if you can think of any more, now's your opportunity to get them in there.
Okay, so is ERCOT not registered as a TOP? So ERCOT is registered as a TOP. I think this question might be asking about the slide where I had like the building blocks and showing what ERCOT was registered for and then all the other entities. So ERCOT is actually a TOP. I think I was just referring to the other functions are those which are only served by ERCOT and no other entities. Okay, this question, how long does it take to get access to cores? I'm not going to be able to give an exact amount of time on this. This is something that would go through the NERC help desk to be set up for the access to cores. But so I would reach out to them to get an answer for this one.
All right, Erin, it looks like you're getting off easy. Just in case any other questions filter in, we'll stall for a bit of time here, and I'll remind folks that we've got a whole slew of other 101s coming up. The next one is going to be tomorrow, and that is going to be an introduction to Align. Erin, would you like to give us any closing comments while we're waiting for any possible last questions?
I think I just would wish that everyone has a great rest of their day. And again, reach out to me with any questions, comments, concerns, anything at all about registration. We're here for you. So.
Great. Thank you so much, Erin, and thank you all for joining us. Again, if you'd like any letters certifying that you are attending any of these sessions, just email information@texasre.org. Or if you've got any questions for Erin, you can shoot them to registration@texasre.org. We're happy to hear from you. Have a great day.